I'm Father John Bethancourt, and we're at Holy Trinity Orthodox Church in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was raised Anglican or Episcopalian. My parents took us to church regularly. Sunday was non-negotiable. It was a day where we gave ourselves to the Lord. And so I was raised in a liturgical setting, in a liturgical church. And a lot of those old prayers still live within me. I'm thankful to my parents for having brought me up in a liturgical church because it set the tone and gave me a certain hunger for transcendent worship. That is, knowing God both through the scriptures and the preaching and teaching and so forth of the church, the feast days, the celebrations, the fasts, and so forth of the church, but also in some mystical, transcendent way, I would sense as a little child that there was something more going on in the church service, that there was something heavenly, somehow heaven and earth joined together. And all of that set hunger in me for something even more transcendent, more mystical, more iconic and cosmological, something that would be both concretely on this earth, but also connected directly with heaven, with the heavenly realm. So I'm thankful for that, and I was raised Episcopalian, and then it was during the 60s. It's easy to go astray, and that was a time that was easy to be drawn into trying to find that beauty, that freedom, that mystical life in other forms. And of course, lots of folks in the 60s found themselves bankrupt and off course. And so in the 60s, there was also a very lively Protestant Jesus movement going on, lots of hippies becoming baptized and entering into churches and so forth, and trying to find their way in a confusing time. And for me during that time, I got involved with a group called Young Life. And Young Life was a very relational form of Protestant Christianity, geared towards high school students primarily. And when I say relational, I mean that the leaders of the group came on the campus to meet with us, and they valued relationship. We had conversations. We would have meals together. They wanted to, as they would say, earn the right to be heard, not just push down, kind of cram down some kind of quick kind of spirituality and push you towards making, a confession of Christ or praying the sinner's prayer or something like that. But it was a relational form of Christianity. They walked with us and listened to our needs. And of course, they would bring biblical teachings to us. And eventually, through that form of Protestant Christianity, I made a more adult or a conscious adult confession of Christ, a conversion to Christ, and began to study the scriptures with them and so forth. But after years of that, in both high school and in college, although I'm very grateful for the kind of biblical emphasis that they encouraged us to read the scriptures, to believe that God speaks to us through the scriptures, eventually it wasn't enough. My heart hungered for, again, contemplative life, a more meditative, a more mystical life, a life where the biblical story would become typologically my story, that my story and the biblical story would coincide, that it would be the same Jesus that the apostles knew, that I would know. I wanted that deepening personal relationship. Now, I know evangelical Protestants often emphasize the personal nature of conversion, and yet I found that often it wasn't deep enough. I was searching and yearning for something more. And so in college, my first year in college, when I was 18 years old, I met a professor, Dr. Bill Baroudi, Lebanese Orthodox Christian, although I didn't know anything at all about Eastern Orthodoxy. All I knew is that this professor was unlike any other Christian I'd met. The way he talked about the Lord, the way he would communicate. And he taught at Arizona State University courses on biblical backgrounds to literature. So he taught on English literature, but all the biblical references. And of course, you have to be somewhat biblically literate to even know those references that are in our literature, English literature. But he would show even greater connections. And so I learned from him. I took his courses, but mostly I felt I was encountering something of the holy in this man. I would say today he was, if not the most, one of the very most sanctified human beings I've ever met. And he was full of the joy and love of the Lord. It's hard to explain maybe what the differences were from what I had been brought up, but he embodied something more. I say often that to be with Bill Baruti, when we eventually became on a first-name basis, so to be with Bill, I would say it was always heaven and hell at the same time. What do I mean? Heaven, because he was so full of light and so sanctified, such an embodiment of what I know to be now, the theological word is theosis, to be literally engodded, to be so filled with God, to be in God and God in him, so sanctified, so much a partaker of the divine nature, as St. Peter speaks about it. To be with that was to be in heaven, but it was also hell because I was so much not that. I was so far from that, so lacking in real sanctification. I had a lot of head knowledge, but it hadn't really seeped in deep enough. And so to be with Bill was painful. I now just read in the Philokalia, the 5th volume of the Philokalia, one of the writers in this beautiful book of the spiritual wisdom and beauty. He's quoting St. Gregory the theologian from the 4th century, and he's writing in the 15th century, 14th or 15th century, these last commentaries in the Philokalia. And he uses a phrase St. Gregory the theologian used that I just love. He says that we must see and suffer the splendor of God. That there is something so beautiful but also painful at the same time because we're not yet fully sanctified. So I'm going off a little bit on maybe a tangent, but knowing Bill was that kind of seeing the beauty and splendor of God and also suffering it. But it's a kind of pain, a kind of suffering that you want more. You want to be more expanded so that you can somehow carry and bear more of God. And so being with Bill was that way, and I spent years under his guidance and care, fatherly care, I would say. And then came close to becoming Orthodox then in the, I read my first Orthodox book, For the Life of the World, I think was the first one I read. Maybe some other ones, In Search of Divine Wisdom and some other books. But I longed for that, but I couldn't really find my way in. And for a number of reasons, in those days, in the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s, I just couldn't quite find my way in, although I knew of a group of evangelicals that later formed their own evangelical Orthodox church. They, through the readings of the fathers, kind of read their way into Orthodoxy, or at least into finding out about Orthodoxy. And so I got in touch with them. I followed their journey in, but I wasn't able to find the bridge to make it in. And I went on a basically 15-year hiatus where I thought, well, I grew up Episcopalian. Why don't I go to Episcopal seminary? I can become an Episcopal priest in the Episcopal Church. They allow for different, the high church kind of leaning towards Roman Catholicism, low church Protestant, kind of a midway, a charismatic way. Why not an Orthodox way? How about if I lived the Orthodox life in the Episcopal Church, became an Episcopal priest and kind of lived and taught and preached Orthodoxy? Well, it was a good intention, but it's not possible. To be Orthodox, you have to live in the sacramental Orthodox Church. And the church is not a thing, it's a living organism. We say the theandric, it's both theos and anthropos. It's the God-man organism. It's not an institution, it's a living organism. It's the body of Christ, and to be Orthodox, you must be grafted into that living body, to eat of that body, to drink of that body, to be alive in that body, to gain the mind, the phronema, the mind of Christ through communion in the church, in that body. And so, although it was a good idea, and a very Western idea, that somehow I could just get ideology, I could just get all of the teaching or the content of Orthodoxy and just kind of stick it into this other liturgical form of Christianity. Well, it's impossible. And in due time, after a number of years as trying it, my own bishop at the time, my Episcopal bishop, said he asked me to start a mission here in Santa Fe, and so I started a mission. And he said, he knew how close I was to leaving the Episcopal Church. He said, make it as Orthodox as you want. And so we had we did all of the stuff. We had all of the stuff, kind of like the evangelicals tried to do. The Evangelical Orthodox Church, that group of people. So we had all of that, but I knew eventually that group of people was not Orthodox. And of course we had bishops who denied the faith, who denied the creed, who denied the resurrection of Christ, who denied the virginity of the Mother of God. And how does light and darkness stay together? How do you live within that and not become, crazy, insane? And I would say I came close to the edge of sanity trying to do that. But eventually, I met the bishop who ordained me, Bishop Basil, of the Diocese of Wichita in the Antiochian Archdiocese. And we began a relationship, and in due time, he brought me and a small group of people from that mission into the Orthodox Church. That was at the end of 1995, and we started this mission here that's now Holy Trinity Orthodox Church. We began the mission. We had the blessing of our Metropolitan Bishop to begin that the beginning of 1996. And because we had a group, eventually I was ordained a priest, and we had a small mission, we bought this property that it was just a house on a property, and that's where we started the church. And since then, in 2003, it was morphed into what it is now. We put a second story on the original house and then built this church to worship in. And so that's kind of a little bit of that journey from my upbringing to actually becoming Orthodox. And then, of course, you're just beginning. I often will say, it's possible to master Anglicanism. It's a human religion, and it can be mastered. One can get the content and be able to, I think, master Anglicanism. Orthodoxy is impossible to master. It's simply an ocean to swim in. It's so huge. The only way to know it is to enter into it and to begin to be expanded so that you can receive more of God's life and of the kingdom of heaven. After all these years, nearly 30 years of being Orthodox, I've just begun, and have just begun to taste and to know and to experience and to live the Orthodox way. And may God grant me more time in this world to see more of the reality of who God is and his church here on earth and in the kingdom of heaven. What is the Orthodox Church? Well, what does it mean to be an Orthodox Christian? It's the living body of Christ. It's the incarnation extended through all time and all space and every generation. It is the same yesterday, today, and forever, because it is the body of Jesus Christ who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So as I said, it's a theandric being. It's the union. This is, for us, the very central doctrine of Orthodox Christianity is the incarnation. I would say, two things that we just focus on all the time is the Trinity, one God in three persons, three hypostases, and the incarnation, one person, but in two natures that are inseparably united, and yet not confused. It's not a little bit of God and a little bit of humanity and kind of a third thing. No, it's fully God and fully man. That's the incarnation, or as St. Athanasius put it, God became man so that man might become God. Not God by nature, but God by participation, by grace, by partaking of the divine energies of God. And so to be Orthodox is to be part of that church, is to be part of the body of Christ, the incarnation, to participate in the incarnation. We might say also orthodoxy, just the word ortho and doxa from glory, is to have the right glory, the right beauty, the right manifestation of God's splendor, to suffer his splendor until it lives within you. That's what it means to be Orthodox. Theosis, to become God by grace, just what St. Peter was talking about, that we become partakers of the divine nature. And St. Peter says, we who saw the divine light in Jesus on the Mount of the Transfiguration, and it's not like Jesus changed, it's that their eyes were able to see God. And Jesus gives us the teaching that blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And when we speak of the heart, we could also speak of, to use a Greek word, the nous, N-O-U-S, which is that noetic faculty, that ability to see spiritually. Jesus says the eye is the lamp of the body. If the eye is clear, the body's full of light. If the eye is dark, how dark is the darkness? And so it is to come in to the church and to receive the medicine, the ascetic disciplines of the church in order to cleanse that noetic lens so that we could see God more clearly, because, as St. John writes in his epistle, when we see him, we shall be like him. St. John gives us a very beautiful paradox. He says, right now we are the children of God, and yet it has not appeared what we shall be. But we know this, that when we see him, we shall be like him. Everyone who has this hope, because we will see him as he is. We will see reality. We will see the living God. And we do see, but we want to see more. So to be in the church is to come into the place where you receive the medicine that cleanses this noetic faculty so that we can see God, because when we see him, we will be like him. We will become God's by grace. That is, true sons and daughters of the living God. We will have his attributes, his very being. And so this is our goal. And you have to be in the church, grafted into him, the branch being grafted into the main vine, the main life. We have no life within us. So this is a little bit, I would say, about what it means to be Orthodox, to be in the church. It's his body. It's not like some kind of unknowable thing. If I can say this, often when I would have encounters with evangelical Christians whom I love and who have done me so much good, they are incarnational when it comes to Jesus Christ. If you say, oh, I just want a kind of a cosmic Christ, a non-historical Christ, or the Christ consciousness, or something like that. If you say, oh, I just want that, no evangelical Christian's going to let you get by with that. They're going to say, no, you need the incarnate God, the God-man, Jesus Christ, the man from Nazareth, the son of the carpenter Joseph, the one who lived and died under Pontius Pilate. It's historical. It's in this world. God entered the human history and walked out onto the stage of actual human existence. Lots of religions may have mythological stories about God who becomes human, but this actually happened historically. And so most evangelicals will say, you have to accept the actual historical Christ. You have to want that. And in the early church, there was this group of folks that came close to Christianity, but they were Gnostics. They did not believe that Jesus Christ came in the flesh, because they believed that flesh was evil and was a prison for the spirit. And so, like lots of New Agers, or people that want something less concrete, will say, we just want the mystical Christ, or some kind of Christ consciousness, or something like this. No evangelical will let that pass. They'll say, no, you must come to know God who became flesh and dwelt among us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. This one who was the Logos before all times became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. That's what an evangelical will say to a person out in the world. But I say to the evangelical, yes, you have an incarnate Christ, but you have a Gnostic church. You say, well, the church is just mystical and it's just, it floats around somewhere. It's just on a mystical, no. Nobody in the church, the early church, believed that. The church was incarnate. We knew where it was and where it was not. We could say this is of the church, or this is not of the church. This is the mind of Christ, or it's not the mind of Christ. The church was very clear about where it was and where it was not. And so we're not saying that God's grace doesn't go out beyond the walls of the church because the heavens declare the glory of God. It goes everywhere. His speech, his love radiates out everywhere. And so we know people can be in touch with beauty and truth and goodness outside of the church. But to be an Orthodox Christian, you have to be in the church. You have to be grafted into Christ. You have to begin to receive not only the teachings and not only to hear them, but to do them, to practice them, but to especially do this work of cleansing the lens of the spiritual eyes so that we can more fully and completely see God and thus become like him. So I hope this is a little bit about what it means to be in the church or to be an Orthodox Christian. It's an adventure into the doxified life, the life that is filled with the glory of God. This is what St. Paul says is the mystery of the universe, the mystery of the cosmos, St. Paul says, that was held hidden in past generations, but has now been made known. Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's the mystery of the cosmos. Christ in you, the hope of glory, doxa, being doxified. So if this is at the heart of every human being, every human desires to know God and to be transformed into his likeness. This is the deepest heart of man. And St. Paul says it's the mystery of the universe. Christ would be formed in you, and that you would be completely doxified, glorified through the uncreated energies of God. This is our faith.